hope you're enjoying this wonderfully cold day. John and I were just saying the irony of having a fireside chat, given that everyone is wearing their jackets, is something to be amusing, sure. So what John and I thought we'd do today, and I'll introduce John in just a second, is talk about liberating the creative voice and what that means in the context of influencer marketing and how the company I work for, Whaler, and of which John is a chairman, approach that. So I think we'll just start off by introducing John. If you want to give us a little bit of an overview for the people that don't know you.
Indeed, great to be here, freezing as I am. Oh my God, when you get to my age, you keep having to go to the fucking toilet when you get cold. It'll happen to you as well, you know. But anyway, John Hegarty, I'm the creative founder of BBH, Bartle Bogle Hegarty, and I now spend most of my time at a company I've set up called The Garage, which is an early stage investment company for businesses trying to get up off the ground. So, but we say to them, don't start a business, build a brand, because a brand is where value will reside. Getting entrepreneurs to understand the need to build a brand is what we do. So that's what I do.
Thanks, John. And do you want to give us a little bit of insight into how you came across the influencer marketing world and specifically Whaler, and why did you decided to be the chairman of Whaler?
Well, I was. It was a sort of area. I've always been fascinated. I was just saying earlier. I mean, I went to art school. From art school, I went to design school. Design school. Then I decided I wanted to get into advertising. And one of the reasons I loved about going into advertising, you know, if you're an artist, you're a painter. I was going to be a painter. You know, you're creating work, and you know, if you're lucky, 100 people might see one of your canvases. You go into design, you design some packaging, and thousands of people will see your packaging or whatever. You go into advertising, and millions of people see what you do. And being a complete egotist, I thought that was brilliant. And I've always been interested in how you influence people. How does it work? Why does somebody influence by that? So the very nature of influencers fascinated me from the word go, but I just thought it was also crass and appalling and Kardashian-like, and just, you know, had no sense of artistry about it. And then I met Neil. I was speaking at a conference. He was speaking at a conference. Neil Waller, this is, of Whaler, so it's a bit of a problem with that for some people. And Neil and I connected, and he was talking about starting an influencer agency and why it could work, and he then asked me to become chairman. And it was just a terrific way of getting together with him.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I just wanted to dive a little bit into liberating the creative voice, which is something that you helped us as a company coin really as a strapline in the way that we position our approach to influencer marketing. Would you mind going into that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the value that we bring to, you know, as I say, I'm spending most of my time helping get entrepreneurial businesses off the ground. And what we always say to all these businesses is that you've got to decide what's your point of view. What are you trying to say? What are you trying to do? Write a brand strategy, stick to that brand strategy. And it was, when we got involved with Whaler, the first thing obviously was, what's your point of difference? You know, what is it you're trying to do? What is it you're trying? We had a long conversation, and I was really fascinated in how Neil and James, his partner, had come to found Whaler. And they did it because they'd created a watch brand, Short Projects, and they turned that into a huge success using social, using their connections, and out of that was born Whaler. So it came out of experience, but it didn't have a point of view. It was just an influencer agency. And obviously you might say, well, it's fairly obvious, but we talked about what was their point of difference, what did it mean to people, why were they different from others? And obviously, for me, creativity was at the absolute foundation and the core of what that business should be about. And what I thought they did was they liberated the creative voice, not only for the influencers working with clients, but they liberated the creative voice for clients working with them. So it was a kind of win-win situation. So that our whole idea of liberating the creative voice became a very important part of what they're about. And of course, what that does, and this is why it's so important, a brand strategy is fundamentally important because it not only works for your clients, it works for the people who want to join you. It's the argument for why people should be doing things with you. And it's the culture in a way that holds a company together. And that essence of creativity at the heart of Whaler was crucial, I feel, to its success. And it seems to be working.
Interesting. And we read a lot in the press around, that influencer marketing is sometimes tarnished, and, you read of the disasters that happen in the press. I think it really comes back to what John is talking about. If you've got to get the creativity and the creative right. It can't be forced. It's got to be natural. And I think John and I were talking about this the other day, that there's a huge amount of fear around creator and influencer marketing. It's this big new thing, and people don't know how to approach it. But I think the analogy with the past, when we think about press advertising, there's a lot of similarities there, isn't there, John?
Yeah, when people say, I don't know, sure about this influencer, I say, well, look, it's no different in a way from a magazine. Think of it like a magazine. If you're in the fashion business and you want to talk to the fashion market, you'd go to Vogue, wouldn't you? You'd go to Vogue and you'd do a deal with Vogue, and they have all these readers, that's their audience. And that way you get your point across, and you use creativity, obviously, to communicate with your audience. I mean, influencers, in a sense, are no different from that. It's just a different bit of technology that allows them to communicate in a different way. And that's the way to think about them. You could go into Vogue and you could, do a deal with them and talk to your audience through them, or you could do it through an influencer. And I think, we have to accept that we're in a fragmented market. It constantly fragments, and that is both an opportunity and a problem. So it's how you use a fragmenting market to talk to a mass audience, and how you turn that to your advantage. But I think that's the way of thinking about it. That's all it is. Of course there are shit influencers, just like there are shit magazines. The way it is. It's always going to be like that.
And I think just coming back onto really brands and agencies, there's a huge fear of, I guess, outsourcing creative work and creative output and ideas to people that are either unknown. How do you think brands should think about that going forward? Is it just something we have to get on with and adapt to and learn from? Is there a big fear, really?
Well, there is. I think it's an understandable fear. If you've nurtured your company, your brand, you've invested in it, you have a point of view, you have ethics, and all of those things which are fundamentally important. In a way, handing that out to other people is, to a certain extent, dangerous. Who knows what they're going to do with it. But I think the more profound, the more certain your strategy is, the more people understand how to relate to it. And therefore, having a strong brand, having a strong strategy, having a definite strategy is a way of actually controlling that. Ultimately, we are in a world where you've got to accept letting go to a certain extent. I think that's the modern world. Accept that it's going to be different for different people. But I think the stronger the brand is, the easier it is to make that happen.
Interesting. And do you think this working with new influencers, creators, is going to really change the creative agency model? Obviously, there's always going to be a role for creatives and agencies for TV ads, but do you think, the amount of content that is required for brands in terms of social, we're consuming content 24 hours a day. Do you see this as the kind of agency model of the future with regards to digital, or is that going to impact TV or anything like that?
Well, that's one of those really big questions of, what one thing doesn't do away with another thing. What it does is it adds to it. So, I'm sure, when cinema came along, everybody thought that's the end of theatres. When television came along, everybody thought that was the end of cinema. Cinema, actually, for all those who don't know, is booming. Is absolutely booming. Audiences going up, people going, greater value, all of those things. So I think what happens in all markets, interesting things make everything else more interesting. So if I'm not anymore running a big advertising agency, for me, influencers would be a very, very interesting extension to what I could do and how I could help my client create success. So what I'd be doing if I was now running BBH, which I'm not, I'd be trying to do a deal with Whaler to say, I'd like to add you to kind of what I can offer a client so that they can talk in a very specific way to specific audiences at certain moments in time. So I never see those things as a threat. I just see them as an opening opportunity that we've just got to grab hold of.
So, yeah. And if we bring it back to Whaler a little bit, I guess the proposition that Whaler has is really the technology, which is very scalable, allows you to identify people very quickly. So a lot of the companies that work in this space talk a lot about technology, but what does that really mean? And do you think there's always going to be an element of manual curation when it comes to finding the right influencers? We have all this technology which could say, you know, Coca-Cola could come to Whaler and say, find me creatives who create content in red and white in these different cities, and we can kind of build a list from there. And a lot of companies do that in that space. But do you think that, you know, technology is going to get to a place where it can almost, I guess, replace the human element of it, or are we just missing the point there?
Well, I think we're missing the point, actually,
Yeah.
to be perfectly honest. I mean, technology is crucial and fundamentally important to everything that we do. I mean, it's fundamentally important to creativity. I mean, without technology, we'd just be able to tell each other a joke, sing a song, and maybe scratch something on a wall. Technology, whoever invented the paintbrush, you know, it was a major move forward in creativity. You know, a piano is an amazing piece of technology. So creativity is fundamentally important. I think there's a kind of fear of technology that permeates creative industries, and it's I sort of vaguely understand it, because, you know, if you've been used to doing something in one particular medium, and somebody comes along and says, well, that medium isn't important anymore, you've got to switch to being creative in that medium, you sort of go, well, will I be able to do it? You know, will I be able to do those things? So I think there's this natural fear, but we shouldn't fear it. We should try and embrace it. And I think the more we work with technology, the more we make it work for us, the better off we're going to be. You know, I mean, it's not quite your question, but people go on about AI and, you know, and it's going to be able to make ideas and write books and paint pictures. It's just bollocks, you know. I mean, it's just, these people keep spouting absolute crap. You know, I was at Cannes about 3 years ago, and Ing Bank had kind of taken every Rembrandt portrait he ever painted and created a new Rembrandt. And you go, yeah, great. But who says Rembrandt wanted to go on painting portraits? He might have just said, do you know, I'm fucking sick and tired of painting portraits. I want to go and do a nice landscape. The AI could not have done that. So when we talk about technology, people keep presenting it as a kind of, it's going to take over, it's going to, and you go, it can do all kinds of things, which is wonderful. But don't be afraid of it. Just remember, inventiveness, you know, imagination is something, you know, a piece of technology can't walk down the street and go, oh, I just saw that building, that's really interesting. Oh, and I saw that bit of typography over there. I might be able to do something with that. Technology cannot and won't be able to do that. So, you know, I keep having to sort of talk about this, and people, oh, it's going to take over, it's going to destroy us all, and it's a slightly different point to the one you've made. But I think we've got to understand what technology does for us, how it liberates us, and know how best to use it.
So given there are obviously a lot of companies, and we've just talking about it here, you know, all the programmatic solutions, and there is two parts of influencer marketing. There's the solutions at scale, which can find hundreds and thousands of creators and kind of send them a brief and it all feels very automated, to the more, I guess, I hate to use the word, but more premium and bespoke solutions, which is probably where Whaler sits. What would your advice to be to clients and brands when they're thinking about getting into this space and how they evaluate the plethora of companies? What sort of things should they look for in influencer marketing companies when they're making a choice of who to work with?
Well, I think that the most, as I've already sort of said in a way, the most important thing is, I mean, we've talked about the amount of stuff that's being created. I mean, personally, I loathe the word content. I mean, just my dustbin's full of content, and I'm glad when it's taken away. Please take that away. And it's about. The most important thing for a client is to understand, have I got a strategy? Is everything that I'm doing feeding back into that strategy? Is everything I'm doing making that better, as opposed to just creating stuff? And I think because you can do things, it doesn't mean to say you should. Sometimes you should just shut up and not do anything. I mean, so the advantage for a client coming to someone like Whaler is you can do lots of interesting things around the strategy. And you never know what's going to break out. You never know what's going to be suddenly an idea breaks out and you go, wow, I would never have got to that if I'd just gone forward in a linear fashion. Of course, I'm doing it within a piece of strategic thinking. I'm doing it knowing what this brand stands for. But hey, somebody just walked into the room and went, why don't we do this? And you go, wow, I'd never have thought of that. I mean, one of the wonderful things about running a creative department, as I used to do at BBH, was that you encourage people just to understand the brands we were working for and just come in with an idea. Just come in with an idea, I don't know. And you looked at it and you go, wow, never have got to that in a formal briefing way. We got to that was suddenly we jumped, or a creative person jumped leftwards or rightwards or whatever way it was. And I think that's what influencer marketing can do for clients at a cost that they can afford. That's why we say it's liberating the creative voice. I do, and the thing that has always fascinated me, although I've constantly talked about strategy, and I wrote a book on advertising calling it Turning Intelligence into Magic, which is basically great strategic thinking leading to hopefully brilliant creative execution. But sometimes a brilliant idea solves all the problems. I mean, it's a conundrum. I'm now talking slightly against myself. But what an influencer model does is it has all these ideas being created. Because what these influencers do is they make their ideas. They make what they do. And suddenly it can liberate you, the client. You think, wow, I never would have thought of it. I can go in this direction. And that's, I think, one of its great advantages.
And when we think about the way we brief these influencers and creatives, so a lot of the time, Whaler will get 100-page documents from big companies saying we want to do this, we want to do that. I mean, is it okay, just to digest it to sort of 3 lines and give that to the creator and let them come back with the idea, or to what? I guess the question is, how rigid should a brand be when it comes to briefing? Obviously, they want to get something back which is going to benefit their business. But where do we draw the line between letting them be creative, but also having a little bit of rigor around the output?
Well, there's a great line which I've always loved, which somebody, wasn't me, said, give me the freedom of a tight brief. And I've always loved that in essence, this is your job. This is what I want you to do. Now just go away and do it and think of it. And I think in many ways, we always used to say, oh my God, the worst thing is somebody coming and saying, do what you like. What? Where's my brief? I can't do what I like. A book is kind of, 300 pages long, or a painting's got to work within that frame, or, you're limited all the time. And I think, having a definite strategy, this is what I'm going to say, actually makes it more interesting, I think. Obviously, what you don't want to do is weigh these people down with endless nonsense, but get it down onto a page. I used to say with scripts, if you can't get it onto a page, I don't want to read it. If it goes over 2 pages, I don't read 2 pages. Nope, sorry, go away, think of it again.
I won't write you a long email again then, John. I'll remind myself just to...
long email. You know when you open those emails up and you go, oh, fuck. I've got another 200 to read, you know.
It's probably why John didn't read the briefing about that I sent him the other day, and someone else got in touch saying, are you going to get in touch with John? I was like, already sent John an email. Anyway, busy man. So I guess, you know, just kind of coming to some final thoughts, really. When we think about scaling creativity and the way that we can do that with both technology, the sort of manual creation, do you see this as a real, you know, in a world where brands are always trying to save money and reduce costs and everything, do you see this as a real viable solution just to get all of your digital content as opposed to actually using a sort of mainstream digital agency? Or do you think you still need both? Do you think you still need a mix of, you know, brand assets being created in-house, or should it all be done by creators? So we're sort of seeing results which tell us that, you know, the content coming from influencers is performing better than brands. So I just want to see what you thought about that.
Well, I would hesitate to say you should, you know, do away with one particular group of people who are specializing in a certain area. The thing that I would say, if they're not creatively driven, then I would eventually get rid of them. And actually, if you don't get rid of them, technology will get rid of them. I mean, I get asked a lot by people, you know, should I go into advertising? Should I go into the communications business? You know, I read it's all over. And I say, well, first of all, that's all nonsense. But I do say what you've got to do is get close as you possibly can to having the idea and making the idea. And if you do that, you will always have a future. So whatever company you are in, if it's coming up with technological solutions to problems, eventually somebody else will do it better than you. They'll invent a better bit of technology. They'll invent a better way of doing it. What they'll find incredibly hard to do is to come up with brilliant creative ideas. And that's the thing we're in short supply of. More than anything, ideas that actually capture people's imagination, get them to talk about it, get them to pass it on, get them to, you know, wanting to share it. That's what we're in short supply of.
I think also just one of the things that we come across when we're working with brands is a lot of brands want to have ambassadors. You know, they want 5 people just to work on the same thing for a year, and you know, we sort of, you know, they don't want them working on anything else, and we see them finding it really hard to come up with new ideas. How do you feel about, you know, when we go to brands and say it's all right to use more than one person, it's all right if they work for other brands? How do you feel about that? Is, you know, you can't just have somebody focused on one thing forever. It just stifles creativity, isn't it?
Absolutely, incredibly so. And I mean, you get this thing of you hear about, you know, brands are taking their creativity inside and they're going to do it all themselves. And you go, fine, you want to do that. You'll end up working with the most boring creative people you'll ever wish to meet, because all they'll be doing is working on Heinz baked beans. You know, I don't want to spend my life working on fucking baked beans. I want to do other things. I don't mind baked beans, but I want to work on something else. That stimulation is what drives, I think, creative people. And they want that, and connecting with other creative people, looking at what they're doing, driving what they're doing. So I think, you know, this sense of working on different things is fundamentally important. And I think great creative people are outsiders. I think that's their value to you. They're outsiders, and they look in and they go, why are you doing it like that? Why don't you do it like this? As soon as you're inside, you stop having that effect on people. You stop being able to be an outsider. And you know, in any industry, in any creative endeavor, they're outsiders. They're not in clubs and part of a clique, and they shouldn't be anyway. They should be challenging. That's the great thing about creativity. It challenges. If you're inside, you're not going to do that.
And just to close, really, if the audience were to take away 3 things from you in terms of advice when considering working with influencers and creators and getting into influencer marketing? What would those three things be based on what we've sort of talked about?
Wow, the three things.
The three things.
It's the Holy Trinity, isn't it?
It is.
Good enough for God.
And if you don't do this,
good enough.
You're fucked.
Well, I'm going to answer that in a completely different way.
All right. All right.
And I've reduced the whole communications industry down to a simple triangle. All right?
Yeah.
And at the top of the triangle is memorability. All right? Is it memorable? Then over here, is it motivating? All right? So, memorable, I've stopped you. Then what I've stopped you is motivating, so it makes you want to do something. And my third angle, is it truthful? Because a brand is trying to build a long-term relationship. And you only build long-term relationships based on the truth. And if you're not doing that, you'll be found out, it'll be short-term, and it won't work. So I've answered your question a completely different way. But that's if you walk away from it, my view is, that's it. That's all you need to do. Is it memorable? Is it motivating? Is it truthful? That's the answer to everything.
And if it's not truthful, your influencer marketing post will end up on the front of the Daily Mail, and then you'll all be really fucked. And then you can forget about influencer marketing. So with that, I mean, we can take a couple of questions. We've got about 3 minutes left. Man at the back. The man here as well.
Hi, firstly, thank you very much for the talk. I had a question to one of you or both of you, and it was, where do you see the biggest opportunity for Whalar to partner with other agencies? Whether that be advertising or design or...
Me to take it? Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of a partnership, I think it's an understanding of really around the process of where we engage. I think a lot of the time what happens is when Whalar's working with other agencies is we're informed right at the end of the process, and the influencer creator marketing part's always the bolt on. It's, what have we got 20K left of the budget, what is it we can do? And to be honest with you, it tends to result in a very rushed process, scrambling to find creators, thinking about how it fits into the strategy that you already have. I would say the advice for working with other agencies, and we do partner with other agencies, but when it's most successful is when we're informed further up the chain. And I do think in the future of advertising, especially in the digital space, is that creators are going to play more of a role in the central idea rather than as a sort of afterthought. So I guess the direct answer really is just brief us earlier on and get us involved earlier on, and we can hopefully support in your ideas and your thinking. And there might be something that you hadn't considered which we can add value to.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this great talk. Mr. Hegarty, could you tell us a little bit more about the garage? And is it the objective for it to act as an incubator for enterprise? And how does it differ as a model of working from BBH?
Well, just the question is, what is the garage? How does it work? And how does it differentiate itself from BBH? Well, as I said, the garage is an early stage investment company. It's not an incubator in the sense of incubators have the companies within the organization. We don't do that. We back people and we work with them. It's Dragon's Den, isn't it? They come in, they pitch us, we go, we like that, we'll back you. But where it then differs from a Dragon's Den is that we help and guide and get involved with creativity. So we put finance together for them. We help these companies get some seed capital so they can get going. And then we kind of guide them with their strategy, what name have you got? Can we change the name if it's not very good? It's not a very good name. So we get really involved in helping and guiding them grow their business to ensure to increase the percentage chance of success. How it differs from an advertising agency, well, there are many similarities. I've realized I spent most of my time as the creative guy in advertising, trying to get clients to buy distinctive ideas, but I was actually trying to help them grow their business. And so it was very similar in that sense, except at the garage, we're investors as well. So we have a stake in their success.
Hi there. Thank you for the talk. Really insightful. I have a question on brand positioning, and I agree with everything you guys have said. But for us, so we work a lot with China and British brands going into China, and what we found is that the difference, I guess, Britishness is kind of old-fashioned in Britain, but it's kind of cool in China. So different brands we found might need different positioning in different regions. Do you think that brands need different ideas and different creativity in different regions, different positioning, or do you think an overarching creative can filter down to various geographic locations?
Well, God, I'm going to do that yes and no, which is a shit answer. There's no such thing as yes and no. I think you fundamentally have an idea, and what you do is you kind of flex that idea depending on where you are. And I think you've got to, it's that great thing in life is, many hands make light work, but too many cooks spoil the broth. How do you walk this line between, I've got a very clear view of what it is I'm doing, I've got a very clear view of how I want it to be accepted around the world, but also I've got to understand that things are slightly different in different marketplaces. I don't think you fundamentally change. I think I'm a great believer in, brands have a home, they have a base, they come from somewhere. What is the somewhere that they come from? And then how do they interpret that as they go around the world? So, we worked a lot on Levi's back in the 80s and 90s and into the noughties. And, we were able to do advertising for Levi's that had a very European view of America. And that kind of worked in Europe. Did it work when we went to Asia? Not quite as well. Even though it remained an American brand, it had to be interpreted slightly differently. So that was how we managed to do that. But because we had a unified view here in Europe of how Europeans viewed America, but that wasn't the same when we went to Asia.
Great, thanks very much, guys.